Welcome, everybody, to Kind Minds. My name is Kelly Mabel, and I have the pleasure of hosting amazing worldwide global speakers, people that have wisdom and they want to share it. And it came to me early, I guess, September last year that I wanted to do something for the community in a way that people had a place to go because the Zooms and the world was changing and there was a lot of difference. And we were in a system that was unfamiliar to many of you, which was lockdown. And so I just knew that I was going to be on the computer. And I thought, well, how can I bring the world together? And so I began these calls, and it's been more than an education for me. And I have more friends around the world than I ever expected to. And I'm really glad that you're here. And I'd like to introduce my new friend. Rick, how do you pronounce your last name? Ruppenthal? Do I have
Rup,
that?
yeah, Ruppenthal.
Ruppenthal, there we go. So Rick and I, not dissimilar to any of you here, we met here. We met on one of these calls. So someone or something drew Rick to the room, and he was one of those beautiful people that when I said, "Can you want to come and say hi to me?" He said yes. And so he turned on his camera and he turned on his mic and he said hello. And we just got to know each other a little bit. And then each time I would see him in the room, I knew he would talk to me. So I would call him out and say, "Rick, how are you doing?" And he would say hi. And that became a friendship. And that's exactly how it grew. And so it was like wisdom guiding us to come together and to be a part of what the community of this understanding is. And so we had a little call about, I don't know, June 1st. June 1st, we had a call, and I said, "Do you want to come and share your wisdom?" Because I had a very engaging call with him, and he said yes. And so I'm going to turn the room over to Rick, and he's going to share with you past his bio, his credentials, and all of the initials he can find behind his name, who he is, and how this understanding has affected and effected his world in a beautiful way. Welcome, Rick.
Yeah, thank you, and good to see so many people I have known and would love to know more of. But it's um, yeah, no, thank you for the offer. I just found it interesting, like how you said, how we met, and how easy it is to start a conversation with somebody, with one simple word. It's like hello, you know, and then just see what happens after, you know and when you're guided to, you know through an invite or whatever it is, it just it amazes me, the potential and what can come from that space. It's yeah, it's an opportunity that I keep looking for, and it's um and friending on Facebook just doesn't quite cut it, right? It has to, you have to have this little bit of interaction. You have to be participating. So I thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate again, and to be part of this conversation. I want to encourage people just to, you know unmute and ask me questions at any, or share something that might pop up at, while I'm doing my shtick or whatever it is that I'm about to do. Because prior to this, Kelly, me and Kelly were kind of talking and getting prepared for this, and she asked me, like, what do you want to do? And it's like with every other thing, it's like, well, what would be helpful, right? And she said, well, just show up. Okay, well, here I am. So I'm here. And so what occurs to me is maybe just give you a little bit more, who don't know my backstory a little bit. Um, I don't have a really, something that's really tragic or anything like that, but I do notice that there's a common thread of feeling quite not connected, or a feeling of not necessarily that separation, but I felt like there's something different. There's something different about things, the way possibly maybe I see things. And so I've often been, and I know that a lot of us share that same experience of seeking things, looking for things, trying to get a deeper understanding of what's sort of happening around us. And a lot of my early life was spent um, stuck in circumstances, stuck in, and I think a lot of people understand what I mean by that. But you know, playing sort of the victim of well, why is life doing this to me? Don't I deserve better? Don't I, kind of a thing. And always struggling, always getting into trouble, never seeing quite getting it right. Those feelings of, not being good enough. I don't know if anybody has ever had any of those kind of feelings, right? Feelings of maybe not being loved enough, you know, um, and then, there are things around life. Life to me seemed such a struggle, seems like so much unfairness that I was seeing, like, like, why was I not getting those things? And so I played in that world of comparing, right? So like, and the bigger the separation of the comparison of where I was and where I felt I should be, or wait a minute, I got to watch my camera because I'm going off camera here, on my visuals. But the bigger that separation, it just seems, the more the anxiety, the more ticked off I was, the more mad, at everything that was going on around me. And, I just felt, was not, things were just not fair. So I was really stuck on that circumstances. It's like, if I had better parents, if I lived in a better area, if I had, friends, like, so a lot of it was focused on the outside. And then kind of a funny thing happened to me. I find it amusing anyways. But I had been working for my mother. My folks had run a business, and I was in between other work. And somebody approached her about this program that was going on in Victoria. And it felt really interesting and things like that. And so they had this thing where you could pop down and see what it's all about. And people that have been through this program could, share their experiences and things like that. And so my mother said to me, she said, well, let's go and see this thing, right? So we went and we experienced it. And yeah, obviously there was something of value that I saw that in the people that had gone through this thing. And then my mother says to me, she says, I'm not going to do it, but you are. This is for you. And I kind of resented that, because it felt like, well, like, okay, yeah, I could see some value in this particular program, but that just meant there was something wrong with me. And it kind of struck me in a funny way about this whole notion of there's something wrong with me and that I need to be fixed. But I saw enough of something that I decided that, okay, I was going to invest in it, and I did it. And the program, I mean, it's in a different format now, but in that time, and somebody that, if you've been around in the human potential movement, the program EST that was put on by Werner Erhard back in the 70s and early 80s had a really powerful impact on me. It provided me enough of a space to remove the circumstances and the victim and the understanding of where all that was coming from for me. And so and I was sharing with Kelly earlier, it provided me with that sort of enough of a space of a separation between that being that victim where I was driven by my circumstances, where I could start to look at the notion of being guided by those things that were coming through me. And then from that point on, I started to become more of a seeker and sort of validating some of the experiences that I was starting to feel. And so I started, really studying Carl Jung's work. I started reading more, got more involved in other things. But there was a fundamental shift, and I started to let go of that whole victimhood piece and started to really experience the world of possibility. And when I noticed that when I threw my attention in a particular direction, certain things would start to happen, certain doors would start to open, opportunities. And one of those opportunities was to become a paramedic. And I never wanted to be a paramedic when I was a kid. Like, it never came up in the radar. When I grew up, there was only, I think, two things you could be, and that was a lawyer or a doctor, or a firefighter. My uncle was a firefighter. But so that kind of was the mentality, right? And I struggled with those things because I didn't, if there was anything I wanted to be or do, I wanted to be happy at doing it. And I did a lot of things where I wasn't necessarily happy doing them, but I did them because I wanted things, right? I wanted a car or a stereo or something. So there was always a connection with that. But these two guys, we had done a branch in a part of my parents' business. We did a branch in our little town of Chemainus, where I still live, actually, on Vancouver Island. And two guys walked in with these white and black uniforms and asked me if I ever thought of being a paramedic. And it was like the weirdest question, because I'm running a small business and they're coming up to me going, it's like, have you ever thought of being a paramedic? And I go, no, not really. Well, we need people to man our second car. So the way the politics worked in the ambulance service back in that day was, as long as you had staff, you could keep extra cars around. So in Chemainus, we had two cars. And if they didn't have enough people to staff that car, then they would lose that car. And so the unit chief wanted to, it was part of his mission, was to find people for that. So he saw my business and saw I had just opened up my shingle and put it out there and wanted to know more about me. And I said, well, tell me more, right? And so he explained to me what it all entailed, like taking this course and getting your ticket and all that kind of stuff. And I said, well, there's some, and it's part-time. It wasn't like I had to give up what I was doing. I could do this while I was still working this business. But I was intrigued enough about it. And I thought, well, let's just see where this might go. And so I took the courses and did all the training. And so part of the training was that you had to do what they call sort of ride along calls. Like, you went with the senior officer and he would monitor you while you practiced being a paramedic. And I remember going to my very first call, and you got to watch a few times, it's sort of like, this is what I do, okay, now this is your turn. And I was like, oh my goodness, the nerves, all these emotions started to come up, right? Like, I had to actually put myself forward now, right? It was great to watch it in the background. It's like watching, all these television shows in the back, like it doesn't seem real until you actually put yourself into it. And so I put myself in it, and I said, he says, this one's yours. And okay. So I went to the patient, and it was an elderly lady who wasn't feeling well. And she was sitting in a chair, and I knelt down beside her and I reached over and touched her radial arm to check her radial pulse. And it was almost like a spark that that flowed right through me. It was sort of like, at that very moment, I knew this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. Like there was something in that moment that said, this is what you would need to, this is what you were going to do. This was what you were going to do. And I just fell in love with the whole work. I fell in love with the people, the everything, the chaos, the ups, the downs, the turmoils, the tragedies, the traumas, all that stuff, as part of it. And what, so I spent the next 30 years, and I had an opportunity of going to Vancouver to work. So I gave up the part-time gig and went full-time. And to do so, I there were some things I didn't want to give up, and that was my homestead in Chemainus. I still was raising, a young family. I had 4 daughters that were well rooted into the community. My wife was well rooted into the community, and I felt like it wasn't up to me to uproot them just for me to experience more of the sort of the lifestyle of being a paramedic. So I ended up living in the streets of Vancouver. I had bought a van because that was the only way I could afford to sort of that lifestyle. I don't know if anybody notices it, but Vancouver's a very expensive place to live. Um, but I bought this $2,000 van and camperized it, and basically lived in back alleys and underneath the Granville Street Bridge and various empty fields and anywhere where I could find some peace and quiet in between shifts. And but it people would say, well, that's a lot of sacrifice. I never thought of anything as a sacrifice. I'd never thought of anything as it was just something I needed to do. It was just something that it just seemed right to do. So and then what I noticed was that when I really got into the thick of things, particularly in Vancouver, where I would have maybe 5 or 6 calls a week in a smaller center, in Vancouver, we would do 12, 16 calls in a 12-hour shift. And even then, like, they talk about now in the news about the call volumes that are there now. I mean, the call volumes back in the 80s and 90s were just as bad. And what I experienced was there were so many different people having different experiences about the work. Some were really, thriving in it like I was, and there were some that were just not having a good time at all. And and there was a lot of coping mechanisms that were thrown in there, right? There was a lot of alcoholism and various other things, to try and work out the stresses and cope with what they were seeing. But I never got caught in that. And I was always intrigued by that and wanted to learn more about what was really going on with me. Why was I and some of the others having a, I won't say a good, like, you got to understand our dark humor as a paramedic, because our good days are your bad days, right? I mean, that's how it kind of works, because we love what we do. We love serving and helping people. And the unfortunate part is that for us to do that, some things are not going well for others. But why was I having such a different experience to what some of was there something in my psyche that wasn't right? Like, why am I not having these same emotional reactions? The only thing I can think of that was pointing to that was my disconnect around how I looked at circumstances, and that I understood at that point where my experiences were coming from. They weren't coming from the circumstances, they were coming from the feelings of my thinking. I knew that at that time. And but it was hard to explain to people, because particularly partners who weren't having such a good time about this, because they would say to me, like we'd be going to an MVA, and that's all the calls we get. Like, we don't get a lot of details on what we're doing. We just get the the highlights. And like an elderly chest pain or something along those lines, we don't get a lot of details. And some of my partners were having, it's like, well, aren't you worried about where we're going? And I go, like, what do you mean? Like, it's like, well, we're going to an MVA. It could be this. It could be this. What if it's this? What if it's this? And I and I would say, well, first of all, we're not there yet. So really, we don't know what it is. And until we show up, then we'll do and we'll act and we'll have our training, you know. Um, so I never connected what that thought, how I had intuitively was thinking. I never connected until I got into the three principles and realized that, it was just really that mind, consciousness, and thought at work. But at that moment, it was just seemed like a natural thing to do. It's like, we'll show up and we'll respond accordingly, and we'll be guided by what happens rather than making up a story. So we used to joke about it when I got into the education department. It was like, maybe we shouldn't tell these paramedics anything about what they're going to, just say, show up at this street corner and see what happens, kind of a thing. And so, in all fairness, that wouldn't be a good thing to do. However, there's something about that, not of having that, being comfortable with the unknown and allowing your innate wisdom and your training to work in harmony. Because when you're future stating, like, in other words, like, where my partner was looking at that, at the MVA as like, okay, we're going to this what could be a horrific call, they're going right into their memory banks and into their training, going, okay, well, if it's this, then I'm going to do this. If it's this, I'm going to do this, which is just really a waste of energy and focus, because you're not in the future, or you're not in the now, you're not in the present state, your future. So your anxiety's up. So when I got into the training and I was training paramedics and saying, like, part of preparing for the call is not just preparing your jump kit or your ambulance, it's preparing your mind and letting go of anything that you're carrying with you into the call. And that includes the last call, the last argument you might have had with your spouse or your partner, any of that kind of stuff is really about, dropping that, being present and responding and showing up as you. So yeah, so a lot of that really resonated with me. And then I took that as I left the service. When I left the service, I wanted to take what I learned, and because I never, even though, I was reflecting on this today, like, about, because post-traumatic stress and depression and, mental well-being are really highlighted right now in the first responders. There's a high number of suicides, particularly in the province of BC, that nobody can really put their finger on. Why are so many responders, particularly in BC, which is such a beautiful and a part of the country? And I'm not saying that, but the, people are questioning, why is that happening? And I reflect back on my career, and even though I have what people would consider flashbacks or memories of calls that, happened, they just kind of wash, right? They just kind of wash through. They, and I noticed that there's nothing really attached to them. And I wanted to bring that content feeling and back into the responder field, because I never really finished my work when I left. And So I started to really look at ways of packaging this, right? Because I was looking for a process. I was looking for techniques. And in part of my exploration, I came across the work of Michael Neal through his YouTube video, Why Aren't We Awesomer? And I thought that was a great title because why aren't we? You know, and his question is, with given all that we have got out there, like all the potential, all the resources, you know, that we have at our fingertips, all the self-help books, the workshops, all this, why aren't we doing awesomer? Like, why aren't we doing better? Um, and it's a great question. And so and then, you know, I'm watching, you know, his YouTube and I'm going, oh, wait a minute, he stole my slide deck because we talk about the same things. We talk about perception and how it kind of, you know, screws up or skews up your outlook. But then he started talking about this person called Sydney Banks. Now, I've told this story to a couple of people that have been in the Three Principles community, and they said, "Well, you had an encounter with Sydney Banks," and I says, I can't say it for sure, but it certainly sounds like something that Sydney Banks would do, and that's when I had just started to move to Salt Spring. I had moved to Salt Spring for 7 years at one point earlier in my life, and I'd been on this boat, the ferry going across, and I was in a suit. Now, when you go to Salt Spring in a suit, you kind of stick out a little bit for people that live on Salt Spring, and because it's you know, and when you're a banker though, wearing a suit is very appropriate. And so this guy comes out of the blue on the deck because there's one of those beautiful crossings on the Vesuvius ferry, like, you know, that little strait there. And it was early in the morning, you know, the seas were calm, and, you know, and I was just watching, and I probably had my camera with me taking photos and stuff. And this guy comes up to me and he says, he just starts talking to me, and he you know, he asked me what I was up to. And I said, well, I'm going to Salt Spring. I'm starting a new career there, and we're moving there. And then he asks me, he says, well, what worries you about that? Which I thought was kind of a weird question for a stranger to even, you know, bring that up. And I said, well, I'm kind of curious, and I'm not sure the exact words, but I said, the people. I'm wondering about the people. And he says, well, what are the people like where you live now? And I said, well, they're friendly, and they're, you know, they love to help each other, you know, and very neighborly and things like that. And he says, well, I got a feeling you'll find those same people on Salt Spring. Now, I didn't know at the time that I was living a Zen story, you know, but that's basically what he was pointing to me was, you know, where my attention was focused is what I would find. And, you know, and so it's these little things that throughout my life that really kind of anchored this whole journey, you know, like Stephen Jobs talks about, you know, like these little turning points or these little dots, pins in your life that sort of kind of shifted you. And you had no idea at the time that they would have any kind of influence, but you can see now working backwards that, yeah, okay, that, you know. So anyways, long story short, I came across, you know, reading more about Sydney Banks's work because, you know, I started off with The Enlightened Gardener, and then the second one, and then got into The Missing Link, and everything started to, and it was an appropriate title for The Missing Link because to me that was what was missing. That was the piece that was missing. And then I wanted to learn, okay, so what's the technique that everybody's using? Like, there's all these coaches out there, you know, they're saying that they have this grounding and the understanding and this stuff. It's like, what techniques are you using? And I couldn't find any. I couldn't find anything. And every time well, what do you do? Like I was looking for, like, what do you do so I can replicate this? And well, we just have conversations about what? It's like, what do you mean you just have conversations? Well, we just have conversations, and so I became an apprentice because I wanted to learn more about it, and I joined the Three Principles community and met some remarkable and still meeting some incredible, remarkable people that are doing so much in this world. It just blows my mind, that we're so well taken care of, that things are going to, we're always going to come out of this. And I was inspired to do more myself, and that's where I came up with the Unbroken Hero Project, which is pointing to this new health paradigm for first responders in the military. I'm also involved in Respect Canada, which is another organization that supports the homeless in the military services and responders. And so I knew there was a big need out there to share these insights, this understanding, to that community, because from my perspective and what I was seeing is that there was a lot of people, that they didn't understand that they're not broken, and they're being told that they are. Even today, with everything that's moving in technology and things like that, people are still saying, well, you have post-traumatic stress, and you're just going to learn. You just need to learn how to live with it. You know, and Kelly, and I were talking earlier about labels and how people latch onto these particular labels, and then they define their life by that label. And so now they're coming into the rest of their life with this label of, I am broken and I need to manage this, or kind of a thing. And I'm saying that that's not necessarily so. The suffering is optional, and it's really pointing people in a 180-degree different direction. And I'm seeing the remarkable shifts that are starting to happen. It doesn't necessarily happen overnight, but it's like a turning boat, right? You get these big super yachts, right? People think, like they turn on a dime, but they actually don't. They need a lot of time, to go 180 degrees. They need a lot of energy and distance to do that. And in some cases, people need that too. So, I provide that avenue, or that space for that to happen by, bringing this understanding, which is really just a metaphor of, that, we, of what life is like, of who we are and where our experiences come from, and having that grounding understanding of that really frees life up, where you can really explore those possibilities, where the label in your can is empty, and so you could fill it with anything you want, and then empty it again, and then fill it up again and empty it. You don't have to be defined by, well, I'm an introvert, I can't really do anything because, or so. But that's been my journey. There's so much, like I know William there was saying, it's like there's so much that has happened in between. There's so many highlights. Like I truly feel I've had a remarkable career. I've been blessed with being exposed to so many things that people will never, can only dream of, that books should be written about, kind of a thing. We see so much stories, Hollywood versions of what a paramedic is or does. It's not all blood and guts and glory and all that kind of stuff. There's so much compassion in the service. We do so many, between transfers, I've had an opportunity to have conversations with people for long periods of time, taking them from one hospital to another, kind of a thing, and listening to their journeys and their experiences that they've had in the communities that they've been living through, and got to ask questions like it's like, what was it like living through the depression? What was it, your experience in the war? And and I often quote, I'm a big, not only a Carl Jung fan, but I also love the work of Stephen Covey, and in his 7 Habits, which is a well worn out book in my library. And one of the principles is to seek first to understand. And I find so much value in that one phrase, is to really, like, and that's what the principles, from the coaching perspective, is to seek that understanding, like, because there's 7 billion of us, all experiencing the world differently. And the only way that I get to see that is through you, and through seeking that understanding through you, from your perspective. Like, I've got my perspective on the world, but I want to see it from you, because we're all that connected, right? But you've got a different view at it. You've got that lens coming from, like, this is what my lens looks like half the time. It's like, I need clarity, and I get clarity by, well, tell me, what are you seeing? How do you see that world? Right. And it's like, wow, really, not to correct you, but just to connect with you. It's so powerful, so powerful, um and I love, um I've been blessed with 9 grandchildren. So I've had 4 girls and 4 wonderful son-in-laws, and now I've got 9 grandchildren. And the 2 youngest ones are each one has always been a blessing, but I'm really experiencing the last 2. I'm assuming they'll be the last 2, but that how free they are, and how they're just exploring. Like, one's just turned 1, the other one's I'm going to be 3, and and how they're just sort of exploring these different avenues of, it's like, oh, I got a hand. What can I do with this, kind of a thing, and their voices, and then their emotions, how they're you see frustration come in, and you see this come in, and how it kind of just flows through them. Like, they're like, we come up with an emotion, and then we go, okay, particularly if it's a negative one, and we go, well, we have to do something with that. There's something wrong with that, right? And you look at kids, and they don't know that there's something wrong with that. They just go, oh, it's like, oh, I'm angry, I'm going to throw this. And then it's like, oh, laughing and doing whatever. There's so much to learn from that, because that's where we were. That's our whole conditioned self is what's stopping us from expressing that again. And the more I let go of those layers and that personal thinking, I get to start expressing myself more and more. More of me starts to show up, and that's been such a cool experience. And that's why I welcome things like Kelly saying, hey, come on to my show. I know you know the Kelly Mabel show, but yeah, it just gives me an opportunity again to let go of any of the personal thinking of, oh, I got to get this right, I got to do this. And I say, no, just show up and see what happens. Show up and see what happens. So I showed up, and this is what happened.
Yes, you did. I just have to say, could that not have been more timely when Angela's mic just, came off and all we heard was that baby? I just thought, wow, right in the middle of your grandchildren's story. Nine. Nine. No, Angela, actually, it was a blessing. Thank you so much. It was a blessing. I just wanted to recognize the moment where sometimes we're guided to see something a little deeper, and your baby just delivered that in spades. Rick, there was so much in there. I look, I have no words. There was so much in there, but rather than me speaking, I'm wondering if anybody, I'm just going to change to gallery view. I'm wondering if anybody heard something for themselves or had something that came to them that you might want to share or um, ask a question. The room is open for all things now. Yeah.
I, I, I'd like to say, I feel very comfortable. If you were my paramedic and I needed to ride to the hospital, I think I'd feel so safe and comfortable. You seem so homey, not homely, but homey with yourself. And I love that you just kind of meander around and you keep talking about what seems interesting and poignant for yourself. And so I just and your story, it's how our stories intersect and all, because your story about Est and all the rest, and that brings back a lot of warm memories for myself. And your story about Sid. So it's just, it's how much we can learn from our stories, which are all made up anyway.
Yeah.
But what does that word mean? Well, it's just another label. It sounds good. So I just, what I'm enjoying though is just the feeling. You just, when I'm with someone, I how do I feel just being with them? First of all, if I feel safe, yeah, but it's stimulated, turned on, and so curious about what's going on in that person's mind, heart, and it's also wanting to know what they're going to discover in this moment, not necessarily the story that's different from mine, but we both can explore that together. And that's what's fascinating to me. So anyway, I just enjoyed it. Thank you. I like the way you feel so comfortable.
We were talking about that, weren't we, Rick?
Yes.
Yeah. Ray Joan, please.
Um, I really enjoyed your share, Rick. It's so enlightening and so many things I could relate to. I'm just recently into the three principles, but um, it's changed how I am in a lot of ways. I tutor children, so from preschool to grade 7, and I'm more present with them, and I enjoy being with children. So, and grandchildren are the best. I have them as well. And but you relive your childhood through them because they're so innocent. And and I um, and I think that I know that things have come into my life for a reason, in the right time, and I've been open to things. And so the one thing I do want to ask you about was the PTSD comment, where you said suffering is optional. Could you explain a little more? I have a son that has PTSD, and I just wanted to know, I guess, more about what you were talking about.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I'm, I feel for your son that has been diagnosed with that. But and this is, I've talked to Dr. Pedette quite extensively about that too. He's, I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but you can go to his website, and he's got a number of resources and videos that he's put together. He's a retired psychologist that has worked with clients with anxiety and depression and post-traumatic stress, and he's got a couple of videos on that. And Dr. Bettinger also, I've worked with and had conversations with him around that, and we both share this one cause, one cure piece, and it's grounded in the principles. Understanding is that we get, first of all, post-traumatic stress is a combination of behaviors in the moment. So when somebody says, well, I'm having, post-traumatic stress or whatever, it's a combination of, like, if you go to the DMC, it'll give you all the criteria that says, if this is happening, this is the diagnosis. But what you notice, though, is that, like with everything, it ebbs and flows. So there are times and moments where it feels like you're having it, and then there are times when that ebbs and flows that you're not having it. And so there's something about that. So, and understanding that it goes on and off means that it's not necessarily permanent. There's something about that. But when we get caught up in that, which is our personal thinking, when we get caught up in that thinking of, well, this is my label, it now defines me as this person that is going through this. That's where the suffering occurs. So it's not the actual thing or the circumstances that are appearing to trigger it. It's that we get caught up in that thinking, and we get in that whirlpool of a conversation between us, and that's where the suffering comes from. It's the same mechanism and understanding of where pain comes from, because the sensation of a body pain, like I have been told that I have a chronic arthritic back from all the number of bad lifts I did over the years. But I don't have that pain all the time. And when I do have that pain, it's pain. Now, what I do with that pain creates the suffering or the less suffering. So if I pay more attention to it, then it's like, oh, geez, I got to do something about this. It's like, oh, this is hurting. This is, even using words like, if this is killing me, kind of a thing. Those are just getting caught up in that. But it's interesting, when I have no attention on it, I don't have any pain. And it's very similar to the post-traumatic stress, is that when you're not caught up in it, when you have that understanding of where experiences come from, you kind of wake up from it and you go, oh, and then I can let that drift. So when I feel anxiety come up in me, and it does occasionally, it's like even moments before coming on Kelly's program, right? It's like, oh, it's like it's 8:30, and it's like, okay, but I notice, right? You become that observer more of what is flowing in front of here. And it's like, oh, I've got a little bit of anxiety happening here. That's cool, kind of, and just sort of be light about it and not pay attention to it in the sense of letting it become part of that experience, just letting it flow. And it's the same with, like what I find when I get memories, right? I mean, what's holding me from being diagnosed for post-traumatic stress is that the memories that I do have that come up periodically about some of the, the traumatic events that have occurred, they flow through me like a train, right? It's like I just see them as, oh, okay, yeah, that's that memory again, and I know if I dwell on it, then it sort of takes a what do they call it? Like the switch happens, right? It goes into a siding, and now it's resting in this siding right in front of me, and now I get to look at it all the time. But understanding, and this is where I love about the through principles, understanding the nature of thought, that it flows like everything else. Like we have 80,000 thoughts flowing through us every day, right? And that's the one I want to hang on to. Like, swipe left, swipe right, it's like, next one, right? So it's the more your son understands that, the more he will see the suffering get less and less, to the point where it just becomes a flow, just a thought train come through. And yeah, so that's really what it is. Did that help?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Yes, I really appreciate that. It's giving me a more of an understanding of how, and then it was Dr. Bill
Pettit.
Pettit?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Pettit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you so much.
I think that conversation is helpful for everybody, and the idea that you know the people that have someone suffering also can be suffering because they're watching that human go through that circumstance, and then they're wondering how that they can support. And sometimes as a parent, there's lots of thinking around helplessness and not being able to support in that way. So the understanding supports both parties in a beautiful way.
But the one thing that really was very helpful is the learning that people all respond at the level of their understanding in the moment. For me, that was very helpful, particularly when I wanted to, and this is early in my career as a paramedic, I wanted to save everybody. Right? It's like, and I had a really good partner at the time, and he basically said, no, you gotta slow down for one thing, and you can only help one patient at a time. And that was helpful because, when your radio is on all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and that's all you hear is there's a call holding, and you can feel yourself being drawn to that. Okay, well, I got to get rid of this patient. I got to clear. I got to go do the next call. Right? Where am I? I've left my patient already.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm not where I should be. But again, it's sort of like, well, that was my level of understanding. Having that new thought come through changed that level of understanding to, oh, right, one at a time. Right? Like, you remember Custer's Last Stand, Colonel Custer or whatever, right? He actually would have won if they all showed up one at a time. Right? But he was overwhelmed, right? And we create this overwhelmness in our lives, and then we wonder why we aren't doing better, right? It's like, wait a minute, it's like one at a time, like back off. But but that's our level of understanding, and knowing that, like, so everybody's acting at that level. So Rajon's son is acting at that level of understanding. When that level of understanding changes, everything changes.
Mm-hmm.
Everything changes.
I'm going to ask just because I'm interested and curious for Ray Joan and for her son or for other people in the room. As a first responder dealing with PTSD, probably more regularly than a lot of other people, I also have friends in the police department, and they have a whole section in the police department they call the broken toys. These are the people that have been affected by these things. It's the saddest situation, to be honest. But I'm going to ask you, for somebody who's never experienced the principles, suffering from PTSD, what is your first directive, rather than, like, maybe they're not going to come to a webinar, they're not going to see, like, is there, what would you suggest for somebody who has nothing in the way of this understanding to begin? Or how do you begin with your people who don't?
I think is one thing that served me is over the years is questioning the beliefs, right? Now that takes a different level of understanding, right? So again, if I'm caught in it, I'm not going to see it.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm drowning, I'm not going to see it. When I relax and start to float, then there's an opportunity for me to see something. So the question I think you're asking is, when I see somebody that's drowning, I reach out. Mm-hmm. and listen. And I think we don't listen enough. Not listen to fix, and that was something that I needed to shift myself. But just to listen, because there's so many stories there that are not being told because they're living in isolation and they're caught up in it. And there's so much freeing power in sharing the story with somebody that holds no judgment, nothing on it. And so when I hear, and I kind of, when something grabs my attention, and it's usually, reading somebody's post or something along those lines, and I go, it just occurs to me to reach out and say, I'm here to listen. And that's the first step. And if they're willing to let me listen, and then we'll just see what happens from there. Like, to me, is getting rid of all the steps.
Yeah.
Right? It's sort of like, okay, when that happens, we're going to do this. Like, I remember getting it. I took formal coaching, and I might still have it. I don't know. 500 great questions to ask your client.
Yeah.
And they were all categorized, right? So, but it's so refreshing not to have all the answers, and to be comfortable with not having all the answers. And I know, as a superintendent, so I rose through the ranks, and what I experienced as a superintendent was my world opened up. So instead of just seeing my partner and the crew that was sort of around me and the people that we interacted, I was now in charge of 200 paramedics in all of the Lower Mainland. And I was responsible for their well-being in the 4 days that I was on shift. So we had 4 12-hour shifts. What I found, for me, it was quite I was comfortable enough to just listen to people when I noticed things were not right. So I intuitively, I could tell through knowing them that something wasn't right, and I would reach out. I found with others that were reluctant to do that was because they weren't comfortable with that unknown piece. Like, what if I throw them over the edge? What if I make it worse than it is? All those things, right? So their whole personal thinking would get in the way of them helping. Mm-hmm. And they, it's like, well, we need better training. There's no training. You just need to listen better, kind of like just connect. That's all you want to do, is just connect. And it's amazing how resilient people really, really are.
Mm-hmm.
And they have that sense, they even say it to me, like, it's like, how do you, I just feel better just by speaking. I just felt better just by speaking. Okay, well, then we just keep going that direction. Just because it's all they're all caught up in it. And as soon as they release that energy of just through the act of speaking in a free environment where they're not going to be judged and not going to be corrected and not going to be, well, this is what you should do. Just, it's like, how do you feel? It's like, I actually feel pretty good. Like, I feel released. I feel like there's something lifted off of me, right? Great. Let's just go with that. Let's go past that, right? Like, I have nothing more after that, right? Well, what happens if it happens again? I says, well, we just go back to square one again. It's like, and the more they understand and see that how it has its own energy and it flows through them when they don't resist it, when they don't, when they become more comfortable with it. And I think that's where, if there was anything, and I know Sid says in one of his quotes, which is funny that people can't find where it's written, but they quote it quite often, is, if we were not afraid of our experiences, right?
Yeah.
That alone would change the world. And I kind of twisted it a little bit in the sense of, if we were more comfortable with our feelings, that would make a huge difference. Regardless of what that feeling is, if we were just comfortable enough with it and just allowed it to express it, just like those kids, just like my grandkids. It's like, it's like when my daughter says, it's like, oh, Liam had this temper tantrum and he threw this thing, and they go, yeah, okay. But it didn't last. It just went away. And then I said, well, what happened next? And he said, well, he just went off playing with something different. That's what is available to us when we stop fixing.
Was that helpful, Ray John?
Yes, very, very helpful. I've got things to think about now, and and thank you so much.
James and Rosalind have their hand up, Rick.
Rick, great talk. And the question that I was going to bring up, and what I was so happy to hear from you that I can use with helping others, is the idea of listening. And then Kelly reiterated it, and you expounded on it very well. And I think that's valuable information. And the in-depth that they had with the post-traumatic stress was also invaluable. So that's helped me a lot watching you today. I think it was excellent. I'm sure you feel great about what you shared.
Thanks, James. Thank you.
Thank you, James. I said to Rick when we began the call that sometimes there's these moments where silence takes over the room. And oftentimes there's reflection in the conversation of what's just been said. And it takes a little while, even for me, to catch up with my own thinking around, wow, what did I just hear? What was just in front of me? For what golden gem was right there in front of me? And so maybe you also have that experience. I don't know, but how are you feeling, Rick?
Good. I'm. Uh, it's funny how I know we have a few more minutes here, but it's just so interesting language. How even by, and I'm not saying that there's something wrong with this, but I just find it interesting. Like, like you asking me, like, how do I feel? Right. Because it's important. It feels important that people feel good.
Mm.
And when we see people not feeling good, there's, I sense this draw from myself. Like, it's like, oh man, you know, um, what did I do to contribute to that? you know, and and I love in the missing link where Sid points to this notion of contentment. And to me, contentment is that level of peace and understanding of just that is the way it is. And I have nothing, like I'm content with our conversation today,
Yeah.
right? Just beautiful people, and um,
Hmm.
you know,
I want to say to everybody, Rick is not an anomaly, although he is very special to me and to this room for his labor of love that he's given. I say that because you're all full of wisdom and that this room is open to yours as well as anybody, that because we don't know what was going to be unfolded today. And I said to Rick, if it's just you and me in the room, I'm good with it. And then all of you beautiful people showed up to be part of what is this experience. So I'm going to say that if no one else has any questions, that I think this is a wrap. And I want to thank Rick. Thank you so much for saying yes, because we wouldn't be here if you didn't. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing, and your participation means the world to this understanding, and I very much appreciate the service and work that you've done and that you're still doing.
thank you, Kelly. Thank you, everybody.
Mm-hmm. So you will be able to see me in the rooms Monday. Let me just tell you what's coming up. I'm just preparing Rita Shuford next week. And so, same time, same place, same kind minds will be here to celebrate you and have you part of this amazing conversation. So, until next week, my friends, much love, much peace to all of you.
Bye bye.
Bye for now.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Kelly, you want to hang out for a second?
I will, yes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
See you next week. Lovely to have you here. Thank you, Angela, for your baby. I'm just going to, just a sec. I put Angela in the waiting room. There we go. Hi. Stop the recording.